Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. BC politics may take a new turn. BC United leader Kevin Falcon says there are some backroom talks with the BC Conservatives. Do you think the two parties should merge? In half an hour, the province will bring before and after school childcare to some schools. And school hours certainly don't coincide with most parents' working hours. So what childcare options do working parents need? And how do you juggle work and childcare? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page. You can call us now on our top story. Do you think the BC United and BC Conservative parties should look at merging? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, the latest poll by Abacus Data shows the NDP are still leading in the polls, but that lead is shrinking. And that's as the BC Conservatives gain more support. Meanwhile, the official opposition, the BC United Party, is in third and continues to lose support from voters. And there have been questions about a potential merger between the two centre-right parties. And the leaders were asked about it by reporters yesterday. And here's, first of all, Conservative Party leader John Rustad.
John, can you update us on the last time anyone approached you for merger talks?
Let me see. The last time somebody approached me on merger talks was probably a day or two ago.
Who was that? What was the details? Can you tell us what that was? Who that was?
No, sorry. Let me be clear. Nobody's approached me directly. Nobody has contacted me. Nobody has been involved with me. There has been conversations that have been going on between various business groups with regards to what a potential could be between the United Party and the Conservative Party. But I can tell you, we will not compromise our principles. We'll not compromise what we have been building as a party. People are tired of 33 years. It's been 16 years of BC Liberal and 17 years of NDP. They're looking for something different, and that's what we are going to deliver for people in the province.
What would it look like, though, in your mind? Would it be a merger of the two parties, a non-compete clause?
I couldn't speculate. All I do know is that the Conservative Party of British Columbia will run 93 candidates in the next election.
So who, was it at the party level the conversation was happening? Or
I don't want to say anything further. It's just there has been some conversations that people have reached out. I have no idea whether those people can speak officially on behalf of the United Party or not. But obviously, given that the United Party is at 13%, it's not surprising that they're a little concerned about their future.
That's John Rustad, leader of the BC Conservative Party. And here now is Kevin Falcon, leader of BC United, responding to a question about it from Check TV's Rob Shaw.
Yes, we've engaged in some discussions. We've got emissaries from both parties that are having discussions to see if we can find common ground, recognizing that the real enemy is the NDP government. And 4 more years of that government, I think, will be, frankly, economically devastating for the province of British Columbia. And that's why we have to put aside our own egos, our own party issues, everything else, and just figure out whether there's common ground that can keep in mind what the most important goal is, and that is making sure we don't end up with another NDP government. I think you have to recognize that both parties bring strengths and weaknesses, okay? And so when you have a discussion like that, you've got to recognize they have a good name. It happens to be the same kind of name as a federal party that's very popular right now, even though they're two very distinct parties. There's no connection. But that is a real positive right now. But we also have strengths too. We have strengths in organization, in fundraising, in exceptional candidates, and policies that are well thought through.
That is Kevin Falcon, leader of BC United. Now, with 156 days left until the provincial election on Saturday, October 19th, we're asking you, do you think BC United and the BC Conservatives should merge? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now to take your calls is Rachel Siegel. She's a regular panelist for CBC's Power and Politics, CEO of Beyond a Ballot, and a former senior director with BC United. Hi, Rachel. Good afternoon.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Are you surprised by these talks, potentially somewhere in the background of a merger?
I would be surprised if they weren't having these talks, frankly. I think it's something that's been discussed broadly amongst us politicos throughout the province for many months, especially as we're seeing more and more polls coming out showing that the majority of British Columbians actually probably intend to not vote for the NDP in the next election. The question is, how does the center right in this province rally that vote together to defeat the NDP? And I think Kevin Falcon in his clip that you played did touch on that a little bit, but I would be surprised if this hadn't been talked about. What I was surprised at was John Rustad coming out and talking about it so publicly yesterday. An interesting day. He had some issues with one of his candidates, so a lot of questions about whether or not it was to kind of change the story on a candidate that had made comments on abortion, or what. So to answer your question, no, I'm not surprised.
I just want to get through the details of that. You were surprised that John Rustad actually came out and said, there have been some business groups wanting, calling for this, looking at potential talks. So tell us, he did also say we will commit to our principles, right? That we're not going to compromise on our principles. He was booted from the BC United caucus after some comments he made regarding climate change. So how do you see, and I'd like to also specify what you talked about there, some issues with a candidate and comments around abortion. He did say yesterday he would not reopen that issue around abortion. The BC Conservative Party would not. But how much common ground is there between these two parties?
Well, if you look at the history of the BC Liberal Party, which is now called BC United, that was a big tent party and continues to be put forward under BC United as the big tent party. Like you said, John Rustad used to be with the BC Liberals. Kevin Falcon asked him to step out of that caucus, and he then became leader of BC Conservatives. Interestingly, both John Rustad and Kevin Falcon sat as cabinet ministers under the Gordon Campbell government. So these two men have worked closely together, holding potentially different political views. And I think that Falcon also echoed what John Rustad said in his conversation with media yesterday, saying that BC United would also stay close to their principles. They have already elected many of their own candidates, as have the Conservatives. And so it's not an easy task if this were to happen. But again, we're just at the point of conversations, and ultimately the likelihood probably maybe not so easily.
You don't think very likely?
After listening to both of them and looking at where the polls are, how they're rolling out candidates, I would say what's more likely is what we saw with the NDP in this province and the Greens after the 2018 election, where they had a supply and confidence agreement in order for the NDP, who didn't win government during the election, to take over, and for, at the time, John Horgan to become premier. The question is, what will it look like on October 20th? And how will these discussions change post-election and the outcome of those 93 races? Like I said, I think asking candidates to not run after the vetting processes, the commitment that they've made to these teams. I mean, politics is a team sport. And so to ask a candidate to not run ultimately would not be a great look for either of these men.
It's interesting to speculate anyway, isn't it? Rachel Siegel, my guest, is the CEO of Beyond a Ballot, also a regular panelist for CBC's Power and Politics, and a former senior director with the BC United Party. And we're asking you, what do you think of these apparent talks going on, backroom talks about a potential merger between BC United and the BC Conservatives? Do you think the two parties should merge? Our number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. James is up first in Surrey. Hi, James. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Michelle. How are you?
I am doing well, thanks. And how about yourself? What are your thoughts about this idea and the apparent proposals from emissaries, as Kevin Falcon described them?
Well, listen, Michelle, I am 69 years old gentleman who lives in Surrey, and I am just so tired of this NDP slash liberals, and I think it's a great idea to change all the time because, like, in the province, I gotta tell you this, for the last 10 years, somebody needs to point out what these guys have done at all in their lifetime, you know, like...
What they have achieved since they were elected?
Exactly, yes. Like, they always talk, look at the Jagmeet Singh and then what's the other guy, Trudeau, like...
Okay, you're talking about federal NDP now?
Well, I mean, at the very end, federal and the provincial, they are kind of like sharing their similar ideas. So these two needs to go out of this, like the government. You know what I mean? Like we need a change, Michelle. Like I hope people will understand and use their votes properly in the coming elections and all the jazz. You know. So this is my opinion.
Good to hear from you, James. Good to hear your opinion. Thanks so much.
Of course, thank you.
Take care. That's James in Surrey. Tim is next in Kamloops. What are your thoughts on a merger between the two centre-right parties, Tim?
Well, it's hilarious because they're so hypocritical in many respects. Here's the thing. They were a coalition themselves, the BC Liberal Party of federal Conservatives and federal Liberals. It was like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton getting back together and divorcing. This is hilarious. And I think that the right of center always has had coalitions, even though you've got a federal guy named Pierre Poilievre who disdains coalitions, even though he votes a lot of the times with the Liberals and the Bloc. And provincially, it's kind of the same thing.
So it's all political maneuvering is what you're saying?
Oh, yeah, of course it is. And the right are good at it. They're really good, but they whine when the left does it. Oh, my God, it's going to be chaos, you know?
Tim, would it be good or bad for the election, do you think, for voters?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. I think
skepticism.
It'll be highly entertaining.
Well, thanks for the call, Tim. I'm going to put that actually to my guest, Rachel Siegel. You know, looking at this, you hear the skepticism from Tim. Our previous caller, James, said, great, I'm looking for change. But given, you know, the history, yes, there was cooperation before, but, you know, we've seen the sort of personal history between Rustad and Falcon. How authentic or how sincere can people consider a merger? Is it not just politicking?
I don't know if it's politicking. I will say, you know, how sincere are polls? If we take them seriously, then I don't think it's politicking. I think it's asking, showing that the majority of British Columbians are not intending to vote for this current NDP government in the October election currently. And that, sorry.
Pardon me, but it appears the two parties are taking at least this poll and, you know, last few months, previous polls as well, pretty sincerely or seriously.
Yeah, and I think they should be. If polls are showing that most of British Columbians do not want the NDP to be government come October.
Okay, and so how would people take a merger then, do you think? What do you think might be the reaction from the public? Let's put it that way.
I think the public is waiting to see. I think that the electorate generally, and I'll talk about James and his confusion with the federal and the provincial scene, because that's an issue that's been happening for many years, especially with regards to the name around BC United being BC Liberals, now the Conservative Party. The Conservatives in BC have been around for 70 years, but they've never actually elected any MLAs. John Rustad obviously crossing the floor there, and Bruce Banman as well from BC United. I think that the electorate generally is looking for change right now, whether that be on the federal level or the provincial level. And I think that ultimately there is an argument to say that the BC Conservatives have never had a seat, an elected seat in the legislature, and that there are people that want to see that happen and see that change, that new party. Do I think that a merger is going to happen? My gut is saying no, that conversation is really going to wait for after October 19th, when 93 MLAs are elected, and seeing where they come from, which parties, and whether or not there is common ground to come together between those two parties and what the numbers look like.
Jim is our next caller now on the topic of a potential merger between the BC United and BC Conservative parties. Hi, Jim. Welcome.
Hi there. Tim from Kamloops a moment ago spoke about the possibility of humor in the election. And I see there being a great deal of humor, particularly since I noticed this morning that the BC Conservatives have already got 93 candidates. I think the BC United
62, I think, according to, I can check this with Rachel, but Rustad said 62, but they are aiming for 93.
Oh, I see. Amy
Yes.
90. Okay. So you say they have 62
Yes.
or thereabouts? Okay. Of those 62, I'm willing to bet that there'll be, when they go through their vetting, there'll be at least 4 to 6 that they have to pull because, first of all, there's going to be 2 or 3 of them that are right-to-lifers, and they won't be able to stand, according to Mr. Rustad. There'll be somebody else who believes in contrails in the sky. I mean, there's always 2 or 3 people in the Conservative Party that are just wingnuts, and they will have to be pulled. That's the first thing.
That's the
Second bit of
process that every
humor
party goes through, sure. Yeah.
is the first fellow that spoke that you had speaking, and I don't know who he was, but he said that the right has definitely got to unite because we can't stand another 4 years of the economic devastation that the NDP is going to bring to this province. Well, give me a break. That's the kind of thing that people always say about NDP governments. And it's just a crock. And it won't happen. It isn't happening. The NDP can list 20 things that they've done that is good for the province.
That was something, yes, James brought up. He said, what do they have to show for it? And, just to point this out to you, because this is something the BC United might bring up, is the record deficit under the NDP. Is that perhaps a point of contention that opposition parties can go at when it comes to the NDP and that economic criticism?
It's a possibility. I just have one more thing, and this for me is the crucial thing. Last night I read in the Vancouver Sun, now it must be true if it was in the Sun, right? It said that a group of people in the business community want to bring a name from the past back to attempt to bring these two disparate groups together, that is the Conservatives and BC United. And the name they put out there was Gordon Campbell. Now, if there's a name that myself and I'm sure perhaps even millions of British Columbians don't want to ever see again, and that would certainly be thousands at any rate, it would be Gordon Campbell. And I will just end with that. Give us anything, but no Gordon Campbell.
Jim,
thanks a lot, Michelle.
Really appreciate hearing from you, Jim. Thank you very much for the call. Really strong opinions here, Rachel. And yes, the articles, I'm reading a Rob Shaw article here as well, saying the BC centre-right movement is urging former Premier Gordon Campbell to help broker a deal between the Conservatives and BC United as a prospect of a vote split and a BC NDP election victory looms large over this fall's provincial election. That from Rob Shaw. So Gordon Campbell, I'd love to ask you about that in just a moment. I'm just going to take Brian here in Richmond. Hi, Brian. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on a merger?
Yeah, so I'm against a merger because I think from a voter's perspective, whether you are a supporter of the United Party or the former Liberals, you don't know what you're getting. Because who's ultimately going to win? They are very far apart on some issues, and so when you put your hat in to one party you believe in, whichever the two parties you like most, and now they're going to merge, I think the thinking is we'll get all those voters, and maybe they would, but I think the voters will get shafted yet again because you think you're voting for a party that stands for certain principles, but when you merge those two parties, they are different enough that I think as a voter you lose out. So I would I would rather let each party run whatever platform they choose. Those that support the platform, vote for that party, and it all lands where it does. And one other comment I keep hearing, Rachel, I'm sorry, I think that's your name, your guest, say that, a majority of British Columbians don't want the NDP. Well, a majority of British Columbians have never wanted the party in power because every party in this province wins by 35, 33, 37%, which means that, well over 50% of people don't want that party. So you don't need, so to say a majority of people don't want NDPers, yeah, okay, it's probably true, but I don't think a majority of people wanted NDPers for the last few elections where they got elected, and a majority of people didn't want Gordon Campbell when he got elected.
Point taken. Point taken, Brian. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I'll just go through. Thank you so much. Just for time here, the BC NDP, according to this poll by Abacus, has a support of 40% of committed voters, a 4-point drop for November. BC Conservatives are second with 34%. That's up 8. BC United is at 13%, down 4. The BC Greens at 10%. I have about 30 seconds here, Rachel. I'll just let you respond to any of those many, many points, really interesting points from our callers.
Great points. I think the last point I would make is kind of the positioning of the NDP. We saw they're in a very interesting position because of this situation. And we saw Premier Eby come out yesterday and start talking about John Rustad, who is, only 2 seats in the legislature currently. But when we look at political campaigns, we want to start defining our opponents and juxtapositioning ourselves and our policies against them.
About
so
the issues.
Really interesting. Exactly.
Yeah.
As we get closer to October, will he continue to frame Rustad as his opponent is my question.
Rachel, I'm assuming we'll talk more in the coming months. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Michelle.
Rachel Siegel, CEO of Beyond a Ballot and a former senior director with BC United. It's now 12:28. This is BC Today, and we have a lot more on today's top stories, including that. Lots of BC politics coming up on CBC Radio in Metro Vancouver. Here's what's coming up on the Coast.
Michelle, hello there. It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us for On the Coast this afternoon. We are so excited that Sarah McLachlan is going to be our guest. Yes, she's ready to go on tour to mark the 30th anniversary of her debut album, Fumbling Towards Ecstasy. So she's going to reflect on how that album has resonated with people and how her approach to music making has evolved over the years. And we're also going to talk about solutions to the housing crisis. That's what UBC professor Patrick Condon is tackling in his new book, Broken City. He's going to share what he sees as the root of this strife in urban life. So join us for On the Coast between 3 and 6 this afternoon.
Gloria, thank you very much. That's Gloria Makarenko, host, of course, of On the Coast on CBC Radio for our Metro Vancouver listeners. And, of course, on Vancouver Island, Jason D'Souza coming up with All Points West and Sarah Penton with Radio West. Dale is our next caller on a potential merger between BC United and the BC Conservatives. Hi, Dale. Thanks for calling from Port Hardy.
Oh, thanks for taking my call. Hi there.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I'm not a religious man, but I have one word to say about this. Hallelujah. It's awesome, totally awesome, in my opinion, that we are finally going to get a party in politics that sees the center-right being represented properly. I've had a real problem over the last number of years with the two Conservatives and United, splitting the votes up, and it makes me a pretty apathetic voter, although I'm a center-right type of thinker. I always call myself a left-wing on the social issues and center-right on when it comes to economics and such. So I'm just really happy to see this talks taking place, and I'll certainly be supporting it 100%.
Dale, thanks so much for the call.
You're welcome.
You take care. That's Dale in Port Hardy. Jesse writes, just have to say the BC United Party leader using language like NDP is the enemy. What gross divisive language. British Columbians should be working together, not looking at it like a war. Thanks as well for the email, Jesse. bctoday@cbc.ca is our address. Thank you for all of your calls. What a lively discussion that was as we do inch toward a provincial election here in BC. It is 12:31 now, 1:31 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. And coming up in our next half hour, we will talk about childcare and an announcement that before and after school care is coming to more school facilities and school premises, and we'll talk about that. What childcare options do working parents in BC need right now? We'll ask you that coming up after the CBC News Update. And here's Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Wildfire Service says crews continue to try and get control of the Parker Lake wildfire in Fort Nelson, but the fire is expected to grow. Environment Canada's Ken Dosange says the community is not likely to see significant rain over the next few days, though up to 5 millimeters is possible. A 39-year-old is facing several charges after a manhunt a week ago southeast of Cranbrook. The search began after a weapons complaint in Jaffrey. The man is facing firearms, assault, and driving-related charges. And strike action by more than 100 unionized workers with the Cariboo Regional District is expanding to libraries and offices in Quesnel and 100 Mile House. The main library in Williams Lake remains open. Members of the BCGEU initially set up picket lines outside the regional district in Williams Lake earlier this week. Only staff considered essential service are working. And now the forecast on the north coast. Cloudy this afternoon with a high of 10, highs to 16 with a chance of showers in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, showers with a high of 13 degrees, highs in the 20s with lots of sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 25. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon, windy in some areas with highs around 19, reaching 22 inland. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
I will not ask you about last night's game.
Sure, you could ask. Well, it was a great game. It was a great finish.
Yes, not enough.
I mean, not a great finish, but it was nice that they came back, tied it.
Yeah.
Obviously, disappointing finish.
Yeah.
But we get to see one more game this week.
There is
Michelle.
still tomorrow.
That's
tomorrow,
right.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you if you did see the Northern Lights on the weekend?
No, I did not.
Oh, you did not.
I saw all the photos, though.
Yes.
That's almost as good.
That's right. You know what? They were actually better.
That's what somebody said, that the photos brought out the colors way more than in real life.
Yeah, I went out. My son woke me up to go
Wow.
outside, and I thought, I can see some haze out there. Is it really the Northern Light? As the legendary Northern Light? Whip out my phone, and lo, there it is. So it was better over your camera, and there is actually a scientific reason for that. It's somehow the light or the camera catches more light for longer than our naked eye.
That makes sense.
That
Those
does make
are
sense.
awesome photos.
Yeah, the photos are great. So even, for people who missed it, which a lot did, I know a lot of people who felt some FOMO, but just check your various social media feeds. It'll be like you were there. Even better.
Lovely.
Even better, in fact. So there you go. Not you didn't miss out on it on much.
That was my plan. I just check social media. That's how I live my life for everything. I don't do anything. I just check social media.
That's right.
It's better that way.
I do know you. Yeah. At Rob Zimmerman. Rob, thanks so much.
Sure.
That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon, and thanks for joining us, whether you're listening on radio or watching us on television or catching us on our live stream. Very good to have you with us. Well, parents are often juggling their work shifts with school pickup or childcare. And the province announced yesterday a pilot childcare program, which includes before and after school care at elementary schools at 3 school districts: Chilliwack, Nanaimo, Ladysmith, and Nechako Lakes. And they will be located on school premises this fall with a total of 180 spots over the next 2 years. The BC Teachers Federation says 43 other school districts have on-site childcare, up from 2 in 2018. There are 60 school districts in the province. We're asking you, what childcare options do working parents need? For yourself, how do you juggle work and childcare in your life? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Sylvia Fuller, professor of sociology at the University of BC. Hello, Sylvia. Nice to have you back.
Hello.
Tell me about, before and after school care. This is a couple of hours before school and after school, and it's on school grounds. What difference can a service like that make?
Well, I think it's really important, and I'm so glad to see this initiative because really important focus on early childhood education and care and building out that system, sometimes the after school piece has been a little bit of an afterthought. And of course, when we have a situation like we do in this country where most parents of elementary school kids are employed, and they're mostly employed full-time, of course, this really creates a challenge to have adequate care for your kid, because when school ends at around 3 o'clock, your job doesn't necessarily end, right? So if that care isn't available and if it isn't convenient, then it really does potentially cause a great deal of stress and conflict, and in the worst case scenario, impede the employment opportunities of parents. So just before this interview, I actually quickly downloaded the latest data from the Labor Force Survey to kind of look more carefully at this particular group, and I focused on moms of elementary school age kids. So the youngest kid was elementary school age in this province. And what we see when we look at the data for this year is that about 11% of moms in this age group with, these elementary school kids want to work, but they say that they're not working because they have to be taking care of their kids. So that really speaks to, a large number of women who are really shut out of the labor force altogether because they don't have that after school and before school care. And another 14% of moms with kids in that age group are working part-time because they have to care for their kids. So again, we don't have the information whether that's their preference or whether they're being kind of forced into that situation, but it really does show that, for a really substantial share of mothers, and I say mothers advisedly because it's mostly women who tend to be affected by this, the lack of that before and after school care is really impacting their employment.
It's interesting. I've taken advantage of before and after school care as a working parent myself when my kids were younger. But why do you think it's fallen, I think you said fallen by the wayside, or kind of fallen behind the focus on early childhood care?
It's such a good question, right? Because it is so important. And I think that there is probably, a certain amount of just, historical lag there, right? Where there was historically the assumption that, mothers were available to look after their kids after school and to get them to school in the morning. And it wasn't so much of an issue, or that they could just work part-time and therefore they'd be available when their kids came home from school. And of course, for most families, that's not the reality today. And it's, certainly not very affordable in the times we're living in. Most families need to have full-time working parents. So, there's a certain amount of really just kind of offloading, I guess, that responsibility onto families, because we've, traditionally seen, well, it's really families' responsibility to kind of find a way and figure that out. And of course, it's not a situation that families can necessarily solve on their own. And so it's really important that we look to having that social infrastructure available so that, people can both ensure that their kids are properly taken care of and also do the other things that are really important for their family's financial well-being.
Okay, financial well-being. We'll talk about that and broader implications for the economy. My guest is Sylvia Fuller, professor of sociology at UBC, and we're asking you, as a working parent, what childhood options or child care options rather are needed by working parents. And for yourself, as your kids were growing up, what was the experience like for you? How did you juggle work and childcare? What was that like? What did you end up relying on, or did you find childcare? And let us know what difference that made for you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Love to hear from you. What kind of childcare options are needed by working parents? You can email us too, bctoday@cbc.ca. And Sylvia, on BC Budget Day a couple of months ago, we opened up the phone lines and asked people for their reaction to the budget. And we had a call from an ER doctor, a physician, who was calling from the car with her child in the back seat and said, I have just quit my job today because of a lack of childcare. And so she was, it really was an emotional decision, but she said that she just cannot make it work. So here was someone who was working in an ER, and we know about the lack of staff at emergency
These are people
departments.
we can't afford to lose.
Yeah. What are the broader implications of someone making, being pushed to that choice?
Well, I mean, certainly we lose their labor, right? And the example of the ER doctor, I mean, that's someone who we know there's critical shortages in healthcare. So it's particularly highlighting the problem for, all the rest of us when we lose these critical people in the labor market. And there's also a cost for, and again, I'll say women or mothers advisedly here, for their career progression. So working part-time, it doesn't just carry a cost in terms of, you're working fewer hours and therefore you're paid for fewer hours. You also tend to not have as much access to higher paying positions, to opportunities for promotions, things like that. So it tends to kind of slow down people's careers and have negative implications there, as well as obviously taking time out of the labor market. If you can't find childcare, that can cause real problems with career advancement. So these kinds of things can really create not just problems in the immediate short term for families, but also for women's economic security and career advancement over the longer term. So we know, for example, in Canada, that even 10 years after you had a child, mothers' wages haven't caught up to where they would have been. So these are really longer term implications that have real serious consequences for gender equality in the labor market more broadly, as well as for, obviously the immediate ability to pay the bills and manage all those financial demands. That's not just the here and now, it's longer term implications as well.
My guest is Sylvia Fuller, UBC sociologist, and we're taking your calls, asking you what childcare options do working parents in BC need? And for yourself, what's your experience with juggling work life, work hours that often don't coincide with the school hours? How do you juggle the two? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Kim is calling us from Richmond. Hi, Kim. Welcome.
Hi there.
Hi, and tell us about childcare and how it works for you.
Well, my son's at a school right now where they're trying to add in the modular daycares into the back field. And I think while it's like a very convenient option, it's not the care is not going to be as comprehensive as what's being offered at the local community center, which is at maximum capacity and can't really take more kids right now. So I kind of did a little bit of research, and they're going to be charging more than the community center, and it's going to a third-party company. So it's not like run through the community center or the city of Richmond. And they're charging more, and they're not covering spring break. They're not covering Christmas break. They're not covering summer. Pro Ds are extra. And so I think for working parents, that's not convenient service, because most people can't take all those times off during the year.
Right, sure.
So instead of like amplifying what they're offering at the community center where my son goes right now, which covers all produce, all breaks, you get priority registration for the summer months. It's quite affordable as well. We also have the option to do just morning care or just aftercare or both.
You don't have to do both.
You don't have to do both, but with this new service, you have to do both.
Right. And is this program that would be coming to schools in Richmond, where is that? Who's running that?
I think it's called Top Kids.
Okay.
Top Kids Richmond. So they have a couple of centers at different schools on properties. And there's a new one just going to be at our school. So.
And why did you look into it, Kim?
I just wanted to see what the option has been, and I've been struggling. I mean, I was very lucky to get my son into his daycare program. Actually, his older brother, we got him in, and then my younger son was grandfathered in, but parents like literally would sleep outside to get a spot for that daycare program because it was such comprehensive, affordable care. And so I looked into it because it's so convenient, and I was curious about the price. And I was curious about the services that they would offer.
Yeah.
And I also was a little bit upset. Well, our whole pack, the Parent Advisory Council had concerns about the added traffic and safety for the kids at school because they're going to be offering a daycare as well. So during the day, it's a daycare for toddlers. And then at 2 or 3, I guess it changes into an aftercare program. So there's going to be more people coming and going. But then also for the daycare, I mean, I don't know how many parents finish work at 2 or 3, but that doesn't seem like a very convenient option either.
Right, because then it would switch to the after-school care. You really looked into this, Kim. For your son who, fortunately for you, got into that community center program, can you tell us, what difference that makes for you?
It's a huge difference. I don't actually this year even we haven't used it, but we will not cancel our spot. We've been paying monthly, and just because my schedule worked out that he doesn't really have to use it, we will continue paying for it because we don't want to give up the spot.
Oh my goodness!
And now for the summer, we've got priority registration. We just check the weeks that we want before it opens up to the public, and we know our summer is covered. So it's so nice to be able to just have that and not struggle. Like we don't have family members that can help us out. So we just need something that's open from 7 to 6, So,
right.
Yeah.
So you're actually paying monthly even though you're not using it right now. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. And because I know there's nothing else comparable out there.
Talk about maneuvering to get that childcare, eh? Kim, thank you so much for the call.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for your input on this. Nicole is next in Victoria. Hi, Nicole.
Hi there.
And
thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. What are your thoughts on before and after school care?
In our area, there just isn't enough of it. We had secured a spot for our daughter who goes to school in September, but then our school is full and we didn't get in. So we've been transferred somewhere else. And of course, our childcare doesn't provide childcare for that school. And now we're just kind of out of luck. And of course, all the childcare for that particular school is full and was full months before we found out what our forced transfer would be. So we're just not really sure what we're going to do with her.
How old is your child?
She's 4. She'll be 4 when she goes to kindergarten. We would have been able to walk her to school because she lived 2 blocks from the school. And now we're going to have to be putting her on a bus or, I don't know. That seems like our only choice at this point.
Wow. How do you feel about that?
Really, really anxious and frustrated because we moved here hoping, knowing we would be close to school, but then, of course, we didn't get in.
So the school itself was full?
Yes.
Okay. So you couldn't get in, and you're now at a school, I guess that's not your catchment. And at this school, you're not able to have a before or after school care.
Yes, there is a child care provider in the school, but it's full. And they've told us we won't get in until September of 2025, so a year later, then she starts.
So what does this, obviously, as you said, you're feeling very anxious about what you're going to do, how you're going to get your child to school and back. What has this meant for you personally? What your own life?
It's been pretty stressful. We chose our daycare because we knew that it did after school care for the catchment school that we're like almost next door to. So it was like having the rug pulled out from underneath us. We both work full time and we just don't have any options. So we're kind of at the mercy of our employers if we'll be able to pick her up and be able to like have flexible hours or something.
And what do you think the likelihood is of that, of your employer being flexible?
We're not really sure. I'm on maternity leave, so they haven't really had a chance to think about it yet, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I've reached out to them and they've said they will be flexible, but...
Wow. What's your next step, Nicole?
I go back to work in July, so I guess we'll find out what happens then.
Oh my goodness.
We've tried everything to find care, but there is no licensed care. And of course, if we don't have licensed care, then we don't get any of the money from the government. So
you've got a conundrum in front of you. Yeah.
And my daughter, I have a younger daughter. Obviously, I'm on maternity leave now, and she starts at the care provider my child has attended for the last 4 years in July. So, I mean, even if she does find care, she'd have to be in a separate location. And then, of course, we have to do 2 pickups before 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
In all likelihood.
Nicole, thank you so much for your call. And I'm sorry that you're going through this very anxious time right now.
Thank you.
Nicole in Victoria pointing to really not having enough spaces. And so she and her family are dealing with that at the moment. I have very little time, but I would like to get Emily in Penticton in because I know you've learned a lot. You know, your son is now an adult, but in terms of your own career as a single mom, Emily, tell us about that.
Well, I wanted to say I went through university and my career as a single mom and before and after school care, childcare was always a bit of a struggle, especially affordability wise. But I've sure noticed over the years, now that my son's grown and gone, how much that affordability struggle has increased for people and how difficult it is to find childcare.
Yeah.
You know, and when I look at the subsidy that people get from the government, it's similar to what I got 20 years ago.
Wow.
That doesn't help with the affordability issue.
Emily,
you know?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you called in. Thank you so much. It's great to hear you, having that in the rear view and your reflection on that affordability and the lack of spaces. I imagine, Sylvia, that's something that you'll be looking at and see if this will help at all, this pilot program.
Yeah, we certainly, the pilot program is pretty small. It's only 180 spaces. Obviously, we'd like to see that rolled out on a much larger scale because the demand is huge. As these callers' experiences are really exemplifying, this is a huge struggle. It's a huge challenge for parents, and we just don't have the capacity there. And we also don't necessarily have the kind of care that people need, right? So many Pro D days. Anyone who's a parent of an elementary school kid knows, right? There's all the breaks. There's, the summer breaks, the Christmas breaks, the spring breaks, all those kinds of things. There's, huge demand, and this is really a drop in the bucket. So we need to build out this system, and we need to really make it comprehensive so it covers all those gaps, and it's accessible and it's affordable for everybody.
It's really good to talk to you about this, and we'll watch to see what impact this has at the start anyway. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Sylvia Fuller, Professor of Sociology at UBC. An update now for you on the latest in BC's wildfire situation. In Fort Nelson, the Parker Lake wildfire is continuing to burn about 2 kilometers from town. It's grown to more than 84 square kilometers in size. And now a second wildfire is growing to the north, 25 kilometers away at Patrick Creek. Gusty winds are expected to pick up in the area in the late afternoon and evening. And as you know, more than 4,700 people have been ordered to leave the community. 1,400 of the evacuees are thought to be in Fort St. John, where hotel space is becoming hard to come by. Evacuees are speaking of their stress and emotion, and one of them is Tammy Bremner.
I'm just trying to space myself from it, and I just trying to take it just one day by day and figure out what I'm doing next and where I'm going. Not knowing that you have a home to come to, it's hard. I heard that some people in town lost their homes, and there's people there that are saving their homes and stuff like that. And, it's scary.
Fort St. John has also been receiving evacuees from the Doig River First Nation, who say a fire there remains active. And they say that while some progress has been made on the south side of the fire, the wind is expected to change direction over the next few days, which could push fire activity back toward the community. An evacuation order there remains in effect. Lots more to come on that story on CBC Radio, of course, in the interior and north. And here's what's coming up on Radio West.
Hi there, Sarah Penton here. Coming up today on Radio West, we've been covering the fire situation in northeastern BC, and that coverage continues today. We'll bring you a combination of vital information folks who are evacuating their homes need to know. We'll have weather conditions, fire activity, road closures. We'll also talk to Peace River North MLA Dan Davies. He's been working to connect people with resources during the fires. And of course, we'll talk to folks on the ground, those who have left and those who stayed behind. That is coming up today on Radio West. Plus, some small business owners are raising concerns over proposed changes to capital gains taxation. They say it'll harm Canada's economic growth. We'll talk to the president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses about changes he's calling for. Lots to get to today on Radio West. We're up at 4 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Mountain on CBC Radio 1 or anywhere on the CBC Listen app.
Sarah Penton, host of Radio West. Thank you for that. And you can catch her this afternoon for our listeners on CBC Radio 1 in the interior and northern BC. Lots of vital information when it comes to the wildfires. You can also use the CBC Listen app. In Alberta, officials say the wildfire near Fort McMurray remains volatile. That's for 6,600 people from their homes. But there is some hope for our neighbors in Alberta. A favorable change in the weather is expected today, with cooler temperatures and weaker winds expected to push the fire away from homes and businesses. And for the latest on those stories, you can stay up to date on the CBC News app. And again, for anything related to the wildfires, of course, you can go to our website. That's cbc.ca/BC. If you are running low on data or battery on your phone, you can use cbc.ca/lite, LITE.